Hello, my friends, and welcome to Imagine If. You know that I have already done Imagine If Flash Thompson was bitten by the radioactive spider in Sam Raimi's Spider Man, experiencing how Flash would have a life as a hero of New York in a very hard and depressing way. I am still working on showing you all at some point the last two parts of that Imagine If. But before getting into this one right now, I thought of how Sam Raimi's Spider Man story would change if there was a sort of anti hero, if you would call it, or basically someone else that was supposed to be a villain to be bitten by the radioactive spider. I speak of imagine if Flint Marko was bitten by the radioactive spider instead of Peter Parker. How would the legacy unfold with an unexpected turn when Flint Marko takes a different path in his life story? Sit back and watch with me as we unfold the dark tale of Flint Marko in this universe. The story shall begin as usual in the original timeline when Peter Parker, Harry Osborn, and the others are taking a school field trip to the Columbia University Genetics Laboratory. While the class is getting a tour of the lab, Flint Marko and his partner Dennis Carradine enter in, blending themselves in with a crowd of students. "Be careful, we do this quietly," said Flint to Dennis. When the class was near the containers of the different types of genetically modified spiders, MJ noticed that one was missing, telling the tour guide about it. While the guide is searching in the same container MJ was looking at, Flint and Dennis slowly get their guns out of their pockets. Harry caught a glance at the gun in Flint's hand and shouted out for everyone to look out. Everyone jumped as Dennis pulled out his gun and shot in the air. Everyone screamed in fear and began to run. As the crowd of students was running away, Peter gets knocked over by them and drops his glasses, being unable to see what was going on, but hear what was going on. MJ was with the tour guide and saw in horror as Dennis pointed the gun at them, saying they can do this the easy way or the hard way. "What are you doing? We agreed to go in quietly," Flint said to Dennis. Dennis tells the guide to take them to their latest prototype or else. Harry quickly comes in and tackles Dennis down, telling MJ and the guide to run. Peter was able to get his glasses and see what was taking place right in front of his eyes. Flint points his gun at Harry, wondering if he should take the shot, while Dennis yelled at him to take the shot. Peter acted without thinking and charged at Flint to give his best friend a hand. Flint saw Peter and told him while pointing his gun at him that he means no harm and he just needs money to save his dying daughter. While the tension was taking place, the spider that was out of its container came down from the ceiling and landed on Flint's hand, biting him in a blink of an eye. Flint flinched in pain from this and accidentally pulled the trigger. Peter fell to the ground with a gush of blood coming out of his chest. "Peter, no!" yelled Harry in fear and anger. Harry quickly got up and went to Peter while shouting for someone to call an ambulance. Flint sees this in fear, wondering what he has done. Dennis quickly gets up and says while getting a bag to just grab something and run. As Dennis acts in grabbing some of the containers of the genetically modified spiders, Flint feels a sharp pain in his head, making him kneel to the ground. He looks at his hand, seeing the bite from the spider, and the spider's still on his hand. He smacks the spider off and then steps on it, killing it. They hear the cops outside, and the two make a run for it. Flint now gets flashes in his head, making him fall to the ground. And then in just a few moments, he blacks out. Dennis makes it outside, and the police point their guns at him, telling him to give up. Dennis puts the bag of spiders on the ground and raises his hands up, and the police put handcuffs on him. The police come into the building, seeing Harry holding Peter in his arms, with a puddle of blood around them. The ambulance came as soon as possible and took Peter to the hospital. The class watched as Harry got into the ambulance with Peter. The teacher got on his phone and contacted Peter's Uncle Ben and Aunt May. When they heard the news, they rushed to the hospital as fast as they could. Norman Osborn, Harry Osborn's father, was notified about this as well, and Norman went over to the hospital as well to see if anything happened to his son. The police took Flint Marko to a police car and drove to prison. While the car was going, Flint woke up, trying to focus after going down unconscious for 5 or 10 minutes. He looked around, trying to figure out what happened. "You're finally awake," said Captain George Stacy. Flint asks what happened, and Captain Stacy informs him about the evacuation of the class and faculty of the lab, along with the shooting of students of Midtown High. Flint remembered this and felt ashamed, saying that he didn't mean to shoot the kid. Something bit him and he accidentally pulled the trigger. "You'll explain when you're behind bars," said Captain Stacy as he is looking ahead of the road. Flint sat up and tried to get the handcuffs off of him. He heard a snap of a chain, and he was free. He looked to see if anyone noticed, finding that he was safe for the moment. Flint elbowed the door, and it snapped open like it was nothing. Captain Stacy turned around and told Flint to stay in the car. Flint quickly jumped out, and he landed on top of the car. Flint saw this in shock, wondering how he managed to land safely from a moving car. The police car parked, and Captain Stacy got out with his weapon, telling Flint to stand down, and this won't be messy. When Flint put his hands toward Captain Stacy to show mercy, a web lining came out of each hand and went onto Captain Stacy, one on the gun and the other on Captain Stacy's chest. Flint quickly pulled the webs, and Captain Stacy went flying, crashing onto the front of a taxi car, and lost a grip of his gun. Flint catched the gun while it was flying in the air, and he couldn't believe what he had done. Flint dropped the gun in fear, and he started to run, wondering what was happening to him. At the hospital, Harry is watching the surgery in the room. He watches as the doctors are trying to remove the bullet inside of Peter's chest. An oxygen tube is strapped onto Peter's face to let him breathe while they are doing their thing. Uncle Ben and Aunt May arrive, standing next to Harry. Harry tells them, while in extreme guilt and in tears, that he was sorry. He tried everything he could to keep Peter out of danger. At that moment, Norman comes in, calling out Harry's name, asking him what happened. Harry explains how 2 men with guns came into the field trip to steal some kind of prototype. He further on explains how he tried to stop one of them while another shot Peter when Peter tried to save his life. Norman embraces his son, saying that everything is going to be okay. They all looked into the window, seeing a doctor have pliers pulling out the bullet. Flint is running down an alleyway, and the police cars are right on his tail. Flint was jumping over things that were in his way, and when he found that it was a dead end, he made another jump for it. He put his hands out and stuck to the wall, and he was inspired to climb up quickly. The police were seeing this, and they got out of the alleyway and drove around to catch up on him, but he was nowhere to be seen. Flint was standing on top of the building, watching as the police cars drove away. He asked himself how he was able to jump higher than usual, shoot clear web lining out of his wrists, along with sticking to walls and climbing them. He knew that these powers were given to him for a reason. He then remembered the spider bite. He notices that he shoots webs like a spider, jumps like a spider, and climbs like a spider. He came to the conclusion that it was the spider's doing that helped him outrun the police. Flint thought of how he could use his powers to get money from the banks to save his dying daughter, but he needs a disguise. So Flint decided to jump across rooftops and head over to a costume shop. When Flint made it to the store, he snuck in through the ventilation system to get in safer instead of the front door. When Flint got out of the ventilation system, he found himself in a room full of costumes. One by one, Flint tried to find a costume that matches him and kept his identity secret, until he came across a black suit and a chest that had the lining of a spider web and had a symbol of a spider. It had the mask, gloves, and everything with it. Flint grabbed it and put it on afterwards. He snuck out and said that if he is a spider, then he should be known as Spider-Man.